Jack's Marin knew it before the alarm even went off. The storm was too cruel tonight, too hungry. No one survived out there alone, not on Thesson 3. The wind sounded different, less like weather, more like a scream being torn from the throat of the moon itself. It howled against the walls of his outpost like it wanted in. He'd fortified every inch, of course, steel plating, climate seals, old militia sensor tech rigged into a patchwork perimeter. But out here, survival wasn't about tech. It was about silence, routine, solitude. You kept your doors shut and your feelings shut tighter. Jack stood in the main room, arms crossed, mug cooling in his palm, staring out the frosted viewport. The blizzard erased the horizon in waves. Motionless, he listened. Something was off. Then the proximity alarm chirped, high-pitched, urgent, real. His spine stiffened. Jax moved to the panel with a practiced lethal stillness, every step quiet. The screen flared to life. He expected a false reading. Static interference. A loose panel flapping in the wind. Instead, he saw her. She was barely more than a silhouette at first, a smudge of movement amid the white. Then the camera auto-focused, and the figure became impossible to ignore. A woman, or something close. Her skin was a deep, luminous blue, like moonlight poured over frostbite. Her long black hair streamed behind her in the wind, soaked and tangled. She had no coat, no armor, only torn fabric clinging to her body in strips, frozen stiff. Her feet were bare, knees shaking, arms clutching herself like she could hold her soul inside her bones if she just pressed hard enough. Jax leaned in, squinting. The camera caught her face as she looked up, eyes wide, glassy, unblinking. Her lips were turning purple. Frost glinted along her eyelashes. Her fingers clawed at the gatepost, knuckles pale. He zoomed in. Her fingertips were blackening, frostbite, early-stage necrosis. Then her voice crackled through the weather-warped intercom. Freezing, human, begging you to let me in. I'll reward you. She swayed. One step back, then down to her knees in the snow. Her shoulders twitched with every breath, not a shiver, convulsions. Her breathing was shallow, erratic. Her ribs showed through the thin strips of cloth. Bruises, too. Some fresh, others old and faded like they'd been repeated. Jax didn't move. His hand hovered near the control panel, but his fingers didn't touch the button. She was a trap. She had to be. Beautiful. Too beautiful. Even half frozen. No one made it out here by accident. No one looked like that and survived the deep wilds of Thesson 3. He'd seen these setups before. Baited ambushes in the fringe. Pretty girls who whispered promises while mercenaries crept in from the dark. He clenched his jaw, watching the snow whip against her body. And still, she wasn't performing. She didn't arch her spine. She didn't bat her eyes. She didn't try to crawl toward the camera. She looked like she was waiting to die. A voice echoed in Jax's skull. Not hers. His own. A different time. A memory. A different woman. Same storm. She'd screamed as the ship door closed, but orders were orders, and he obeyed. He'd been a soldier then. Loyal. Dutiful. He'd watched the evac shuttle lift off without her. Later, he'd found her body in the ice. Bent. Broken. Still reaching. His fingers twitched. Not again. On the screen, the blue-skinned woman, Vela, though he didn't know her name yet, blinked slowly. Her head tilted back, lips barely parting. Her voice was so faint, it barely registered. Didn't work. Again. She didn't expect to be let in, just like the others hadn't been. Jack swore under his breath and turned away from the screen. His boots thudded on the floor as he walked toward the bunk room. Let the cold take her. Let the ghosts have another. But just before he hit the threshold, something caught in his chest. It wasn't guilt. Guilt had been scraped clean years ago. It was hollowness. The yawning, black kind that whispered in the middle of the night, "You've already died. You're just still breathing." His hand slammed the gate override before he could think twice. He reached her at the gate just as she collapsed fully into the snow. She didn't resist when he caught her. Arms limp, lips parted in a shallow breath. Her skin was cold enough to sting his hands through his gloves. He dragged her into the airlock, kicking the door closed behind him. The inner seals hissed, and the heater kicked in. Warmth fought its way into the space, but her body gave no sign of life. He stripped off her frozen rags, no modesty, just survival, and wrapped her in a thermal blanket before placing her beside the heat vents. Her fingers twitched once, then again, slow, spasmodic. She coughed, alive, barely. He stepped back, rifle still slung over his shoulder, watching her with a soldier's eye. Every detail mattered. Was she armed? Number wired? Number any implants? Nothing visible. No signs of immediate threat. She opened her eyes again, watery black, bottomless. They locked on him, her lips parted, the same words. This time softer, hoarse. I meant what I said. I'll reward you. With anything. There was no seduction in it, no tone, no inflection. Just a phrase repeated, something she'd been trained to say, programmed. Jax's stomach turned. I don't want anything from you, he said. The words felt true. But in the quiet that followed, something inside him stirred anyway, something too long dormant. She stared into the fire vent like it could swallow her whole. He watched her without blinking. Outside, the storm howled, wild and merciless. Inside, something else had entered with her, something colder than the wind, and something far more dangerous. The heater's low hum filled the silence like a distant heartbeat, pulsing through the small room. Jax stood near the far wall, arms folded, eyes never leaving the figure bundled by the vent. His rifle was still within reach, resting against the crate by the door, but he hadn't moved toward it. Not yet. He just watched her. The alien woman, Viola, though he still didn't know her name, lay curled under the thermal blanket, barely breathing. Her skin had lost that eerie glow under the thick shadow of exhaustion. One of her arms had slipped free of the fabric, revealing more of the thin silver lines that crisscrossed her blue skin like a map of pain. Ownership brands. He was sure of it now. Precise. Cruel. She shifted suddenly, her breath hitching as if startled awake by her own shivering. Then she turned her head, eyes flickering open. They were darker than he remembered. Deep pools of black that didn't shine, didn't reflect, just watched. Jax felt the familiar tension coil in his spine, the instinct to put space between himself and anything unpredictable. But she didn't move toward him, didn't even sit up. I know you don't trust me, she said, her voice hoarse and raw. But please, don't send me back outside, not yet. He didn't answer. Her gaze dropped for a moment. Then she added, quieter, I can give you something. Anything. Tonight, if you want. The words came too easily, too practiced. Her expression didn't match the offer. There was no seduction, no attempt to tease or persuade, only exhaustion. Her voice trembled on the edges, not from fear, but from the bone-deep cold she hadn't yet escaped. She wasn't offering pleasure. She was offering payment, like she believed it was the only currency she had left. Jax swore silently and walked to the small kitchenette, not because he was hungry, but because he needed space to think. He poured hot water into a thermal cup, dropped in a nutrient packet, and stirred until the metallic smell filled the air. Then he walked it back and crouched beside her, not too close, but closer than before, and offered it to her. Drink this. She hesitated, as if unsure whether it was safe, then accepted it with both hands. They shook badly, and the cup clinked softly against her fingers. He watched her take a sip, a small one, then another. Her shoulders dropped half an inch as the warmth began to reach her. What's your name? He asked, voice flat. She blinked slowly. Vela. He nodded once. Where are you from? She didn't answer right away. A shadow flickered behind her eyes. Not the kind that comes from lying, but the kind that comes from remembering. I don't know what to call it anymore, she said. It was supposed to be a generational ship. Refugees, all of us. My people called it Zirella's Grace. It wasn't grace for long. Jax didn't push her for more. He'd seen the look on soldiers just before they told him things he never wanted to know. He knew enough already. The brands on her arms told a story no words ever could. She took another sip. Her breathing was slower now, less jagged. I wasn't made for this moon, she whispered. I shouldn't be here. Jax leaned back on his heels, arms resting loosely on his thighs. Neither should I. She looked at him, really looked like she was trying to understand what that meant. Like maybe she'd heard those words before, but not from someone still whole. He didn't explain. Not yet. But the memories clawed their way closer anyway. The face of a child, maybe 7, curly hair, dirt on her cheeks. He could still see her pressed against the glass of a burning shuttle, screaming for someone who wouldn't come. He'd killed 3 men that night, but not the one who gave the order to leave her behind. He'd told himself survival mattered more. That war didn't allow for mercy. But what haunted him wasn't the blood. It was the moment she realized he wasn't coming back for her. Jax blinked the memory away and stood. Rest, he said. Vela stared at the cup in her hands. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely audible. I didn't come here to trick you. I thought maybe you'd let me die inside instead of out there." "You're not dying," he said. "Not tonight." She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. She just laid her head back against the blanket and let her eyes close. Jax moved toward the far end of the outpost and sat on the edge of the cot he hadn't used in days. He stripped off his boots, checked the charge on his rifle, and let his mind sink into the silence. But something was wrong with that silence now. It was warmer, more alive. He told himself it was nothing, a reflex, a ghost of instinct rising after years of cold isolation. But then he glanced toward the heater, where the alien woman lay wrapped in a borrowed blanket, her breathing finally steady. And for the first time in years, Jax felt the impossible ache of something he thought had died inside him. Hope, quiet, fragile, and dangerous. The morning arrived without ceremony, just a gradual shift from pitch black to pale gray as the weak light filtered through the frozen glass. Outside, Thesson 3 had quieted, at least for now. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a shattered plain of wind-scoured ice and white drifts that swallowed the world. Inside, the outpost remained dim and warm, hushed, as if the walls themselves were listening. Jax stood at the center console, staring at the silent monitor but not seeing it. His hand rested near the edge of the screen, fingers idle as though still weighing the decision he'd made hours earlier, letting her in, bringing her inside. The blue-skinned woman, Vela, was asleep in the bunk behind him, cocooned in layers of blankets, her long black hair spilling across the thin pillow like ink bleeding through snow. She hadn't moved much during the night, except to pull the fabric tighter around her shoulders. Her breathing had evened out sometime after midnight, low and soft. Jax hadn't slept. He'd sat in the corner chair most of the night, weapon resting across his knees, listening for anything. Movement, a coded transmission, some sign that she hadn't come alone. Nothing. Just the sound of her breathing. And that sound had gotten under his skin in a way he hadn't expected. It was steady, real. It meant she was alive. And for reasons he couldn't yet name, that mattered more than it should have. He turned toward her now, his bootsteps muffled against the insulated flooring. Her eyes fluttered open before he reached her, blinking slowly, adjusting to the muted glow of the overhead lights. She looked at him without alarm, just awareness, a kind of cautious calm that came from someone who never let herself forget where she was. "Still here," she said, voice rough with sleep. "So am I," he replied. A quiet beat passed between them. Vela pushed herself upright, wincing slightly as her stiff joints protested the motion. The blanket slipped down one shoulder, revealing the faint shimmer of her skin, pale blue, marked with thin silver lines that glowed just under the surface. Some were scars, others were something else. Jax didn't ask yet. She glanced at the heater, then back at him. "Is it morning?" "If you want to call it that." Her lips curved slightly, almost a smile. "It's warmer than I thought it would be. Not outside." "I figured." Jax handed her a cup of reheated broth. She accepted it with both hands, lifting it slowly to her mouth. Her fingers shook just enough to spill a few drops. He didn't mention it. "Where are we?" she asked. "Southern Quadrant, Outpost 7, near the edge of the Thesson Basin." She nodded, then took another sip. "I knew it would be remote. Didn't think anyone would actually be here. There usually isn't." "Then I was lucky." "No," Jax said. "You were dying." She looked at him but didn't flinch. "Same thing most days." He sat across from her. "You want to tell me why you were out there in rags, walking through a storm like you had nowhere else to be?" She hesitated. And then, slowly, she began to speak. "I escaped." Her voice didn't waver, but something in her posture shifted, like the words themselves had weight. 2 weeks ago, from a convoy, not military, private traffickers. They took over the vessel I was born on, a generational ship called Zarella's. Grace Jax leaned forward, listening. She spoke with quiet clarity, but every sentence cut like exposed wire. "My people were evacuating. Our homeworld was gone. We were supposed to travel in stasis for 2 centuries. Rebuild. But something happened. A mutiny. Then the pirates came. They turned the ship into a market. The kind that doesn't need currency, just flesh." Jax's jaw tensed. "I was marked early," she said. "High value. Rare species. Zarellian females are in demand. Our physiology makes us adaptable." She didn't say the rest. She didn't have to. Jax had heard stories, places out past the reach of galactic law where beauty was a currency and consent didn't matter. Vela looked up at him. They kept me alive, untouched but not untrained, taught me to serve, to obey, to smile at the right time, to say what they wanted before they asked. Her voice turned flat. I used to practice looking helpless. It got me food, safety, air. She held up her wrist, showed him the faint ring where a restraint had once been embedded. This is the first time I've been unchained in 7 years. Jax didn't know what to say, so he didn't speak. Just sat there watching her as she took another sip, her eyes calm but not cold. You let me in, she said. I still don't know why. He looked away. I told you. You reminded me of someone. Someone you couldn't save. Jax nodded once. Her gaze softened. Then maybe you just saved her. He looked back at her, unsure what to say. His voice, when it came, was low, almost raw. I used to think survival meant staying ahead of everyone, outlasting everything. I saw too much, lost too much. And when I left, I told myself I was done with people, that if I never let anyone close, I'd never lose again. He leaned forward. And then you knocked on my door. I didn't knock, she said gently. I begged. That's what I mean. Silence filled the space between them, but this time it didn't feel hollow. It felt like the breath before something real. Vela stood, stepping carefully toward him. Her knees still ached, but she moved with purpose. When she reached him, she crouched, her hand resting lightly on his knee. I don't want to be afraid here, she said. Not of you, not of tomorrow, not of who I have to become. Jax covered her hand with his. Then don't be. She leaned forward, brushed her lips against his cheek. Not a kiss exactly, but something more tentative. An offering, a question, and he didn't pull away. Thank you, she whispered. He didn't answer, because in that moment he didn't need to. Outside, the snow drifted slowly across the world, erasing footprints, hiding every scar the land had ever known. But inside the outpost, something permanent had just begun to take root. Not salvation, but a choice. And that choice was beginning to feel like hope. The heater's steady hum filled the room, rhythmic and low, like the pulse of something finally at peace. Outside, Thesson 3's pale sky was beginning to clear, revealing soft, silvery light that filtered through the small viewport. The storm had passed, but neither of them moved as though it were truly gone. Vela sat with her back against the curved inner wall, legs pulled up under the thermal blanket, her fingers wrapped around a warm tin cup she hadn't touched in minutes. The blue of her skin caught the light now, subtly glowing where it wasn't marred by bruises or burns. Her long black hair had finally dried, curling slightly where it fell around her shoulders. She was warmer, stronger, but not relaxed. Not yet. Across from her, Jax sat in silence, not out of disinterest or disapproval. He watched her with the kind of quiet patience that made it clear he was waiting for her to speak on her own terms. And for the first time, she did. I think you deserve to know who I really am, she said. Her voice wasn't shaky, just quiet, certain. Jax didn't interrupt. I've told you fragments. What I said before was true, but incomplete. I didn't lie. I just didn't give you all of it. He nodded once, eyes never leaving hers. Say what you need to. Vela exhaled slowly. Her shoulders sank just a little, as though letting the weight lift off her chest, even for a moment, might help her breathe again. I'm Zarelian, one of the last. My people, we don't fight. We never built weapons. We didn't expand or conquer like the human empires or the Glathian tribes. Our strength was in our memory, culture, song. We believed that if we could preserve beauty, art, language, the inner light of things, we'd always have a home, even if the world around us changed. She looked down at her hands, slowly flexing her stiff fingers. We were wrong. Jax leaned forward, arms on his knees, listening. Zarella, our world, was destroyed when I was a child. A twin-star system. One of the suns emitted a flare that collapsed our atmosphere in less than an hour. The surface was vaporized. Those of us who survived were only alive because we'd already been chosen to board a generational vessel, Zarella's Grace. Her voice changed slightly when she said the ship's name. Like speaking it out loud still tasted like betrayal. It was supposed to be a sanctuary. We were told we'd be preserved in peace, that our descendants would arrive on a new world in 100 years, untouched by war or corruption. But halfway through the journey, the mission fractured. We lost contact with the bridge. Civil order collapsed. The core crew declared emergency authority, and not long after that, we were sold. She glanced at Jax, watching him for a reaction, but he didn't look away, didn't flinch. Pirates took the ship, or maybe the ones guarding us became pirates. I don't know. I was too young to understand how it happened, only that things changed fast. Some of us were killed, some were reclassified. I was marked early, labeled high value. Her hand moved slowly to her ribs, pressing against her side. They gave us tags, implant chips, identification numbers. Our worth was based on purity, adaptability, docility. They taught me to speak dozens of languages, to sing, to mimic the cultural preferences of whoever they planned to sell me to. She didn't cry. Her voice didn't waver. It had moved beyond grief and into something colder. I was never touched, at least not the way others were. I was too expensive. I was to be preserved until the right buyer came forward. But the rest of the girls in my section, they weren't so lucky. Jax's jaw was tight, but he said nothing. There was no comfort that wouldn't insult what she'd endured. I played the part, smiled when told, danced, practiced deference. I obeyed, not because I believed it would save me, but because if I broke, they'd win. Vela paused. Her fingers curled slightly around the edge of the blanket. 2 weeks ago, during a cargo transfer to a mining moon, I managed to slip a command key off a drunk guard. I hid in a sealed pod meant for ore waste. It wasn't meant for atmospheric re-entry. I didn't care. I just launched. Jax's voice came, low and rough. How did you survive the crash? I didn't really. The pod failed. Shields collapsed mid-descent. I landed hard. I was already half dead when I pulled myself out. The cold hit me like knives. My comms were fried. My feet were bare. I walked anyway. For 3 days, maybe 4. Time started to blur. I followed light when I saw it in the distance. That was you. Jax rubbed a hand down his face. You crossed the flats on foot? I didn't think I'd make it. I thought maybe you'd open the door just long enough for me to collapse inside. Maybe you'd throw me back out, but at least I wouldn't die in the snow. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something shift behind her eyes. Something tender, aching, scared. I'm not here to trick you. I'm not bait. I wasn't sent by anyone. I don't want your pity either. I just want to stop running, even if it's only for a few days. You don't have to run anymore, Jax said. Not here. She watched him a moment longer, then gave a small nod. Silence returned, but this time it felt different. Not like something empty, but something shared. Then she spoke again, quieter. What about you? He blinked. You said you weren't always alone. Jax leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. His voice came after a pause, slow, measured. I was a soldier, military contractor during the Veil Wars. I wasn't anyone special, just good with a gun, good at surviving. Did a lot of dirty jobs for people with clean hands. Vela nodded. She understood that kind of life. There was a woman, pilot, smart, loud, stubborn as hell. We got out together. After the last assignment, we were going to disappear, start over. He didn't finish right away. When he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. Got ambushed. We were supposed to meet at the evac point. I got there, she didn't. I waited 6 hours. Send out distress beacons, nothing. Her transponder went silent. You think she's gone? He shook his head once. Number I know she is, because 2 months later, I saw a slaver cruiser matching the same call code. I tracked it, I broke in, found records. Her name was on a transfer manifest, but her body wasn't. Vela didn't ask what that meant. She already knew. I came here after. Thesson 3 was the farthest place I could think of. Quiet, cold, forgettable. I figured if no one could find me, I couldn't screw up again. She reached across the table slowly, not sudden, not demanding. Her hand touched his, barely. You didn't screw up. You survived. They stayed like that a while, hands barely touching, but the weight of their stories finally resting somewhere other than their own shoulders. For the first time in years, Jax didn't feel the need to be alone in his own skin. And for the first time ever, Vela wasn't afraid to be seen. Outside, the light on the horizon sharpened. Inside, the frost between them began to melt. They weren't healed, but they were no longer strangers to the idea of healing. And that was a beginning. The heater's soft pulse filled the room with a steady, almost hypnotic hum. Vela sat curled near it, her knees drawn to her chest beneath a loose, thermal-wrapped shirt that had once belonged to Jax. It dwarfed her slender frame, sleeves falling well past her hands, but she didn't seem to mind. The quiet suited her. Across the room, Jax moved with slow precision, checking the seal on the outpost's outer hatch. The storm had eased days ago, but out here on Thesson 3, calm never lasted long. The cold could return in a breath, and with it, the kind of silence that meant danger. Still this morning, if you could call it that in a place where the sun never truly rose, there was a strange kind of stillness, not just outside, inside him. Vela watched him from where she sat, her cheek resting against her folded arms. There was something different in the way she looked at him now, not just caution or calculation, but something warmer, quieter. The trust she hadn't dared extend when she first arrived was beginning to show itself in the way she remained close, in how her breathing didn't change when he entered the room. She wasn't waiting for pain. Not here. Not anymore. Jax returned from the airlock and sat on the floor across from her, close enough for the heat between them to bridge the gap. "You sleep?" he asked. Her lips curled faintly. "Sort of." "Dreams?" "Number just quiet." She paused, then added, "It's strange, not listening for footsteps." He nodded. He understood that more than he wanted to admit. "I checked the long-range sensors," he said. "No activity yet. System's clear." Her shoulders relaxed by a fraction. "I keep waiting for it to change." "It always does," he replied. "But not yet." She looked at him then, her dark eyes serious. "Then I want to remember this, before everything does." He didn't speak. Instead, he reached forward and took her hand, slowly, gently. She didn't flinch. His thumb ran across her knuckles, pausing at the faint scars. She watched him, and for a moment, neither of them moved. They just breathed together, in the silence of a place that had never known softness until now. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she said, "but I do. With you." Jax's voice was quiet. "I never thought I'd let someone close again." She tilted her head, curious. "Why me?" He thought for a long time before answering. "Because you never asked me for anything. Except the truth." She moved toward him slowly and knelt in front of him on the floor. Her hand rested against his chest, just over his heart. "I don't want to be another wound in your memory," she whispered. "You're not." Her breath caught slightly, and she closed her eyes as he cupped her cheek in his hand. His palm was rough, calloused, but his touch was careful, reverent. Like she was something precious, not fragile. And when their lips met, it was like something finally exhaled between them. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, meaningful. His hand slid into her hair, fingertips brushing the curve of her neck, and she leaned into him, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Her mouth opened slightly beneath his, breath catching as his other hand moved to her back, drawing her closer. The heat between them wasn't fire. It was a steady, building warmth, like the slow thaw of something long frozen. When he pulled back, just enough to meet her eyes, she was already searching his face. "Are you sure?" he asked. She answered by kissing him again, harder this time, more certain. He stood, bringing her with him, and guided her back toward the bunk. Clothes were shed not with urgency, but with tenderness, with reverence. Every inch of skin revealed was met with a look, a touch, a moment to breathe it in. When he laid her down, she reached for him, not to pull, not to possess, but to hold. They made love in silence, the kind that meant safety, the kind that meant presence. And when she whispered his name, it wasn't out of fear, it was out of awe. Afterward, she curled into his chest, their bodies tangled beneath the blanket. His arms wrapped around her as if he'd done it 100 times before, and as if letting go now would cost him something vital. Her cheek pressed against his skin. "I didn't know this was real." "It is now." A long pause. Then, "You won't leave me behind?" "Never." They lay like that for a while, neither needing words, until the silence broke. A soft tone. Faint but unmistakable. The outpost's comm system chirped, once, then again. Jax sat up slowly, not panicked but alert. Vela rose too, already wrapping herself in the blanket as she crossed to the console. Jax tapped the screen, a signal, weak but targeted. The hairs on his neck rose. "Is it?" she started. "It's a scout ping," he said. "Low frequency, looking for something or someone." She didn't need him to say it. They'd found a trace. Maybe residual heat from her escape pod. Maybe a comm echo she'd missed during the last flare. But they were closer now, closer than they'd ever been. He turned to her. She wasn't shaking, wasn't pale. Her shoulders were squared, her chin lifted. "We can't stay," he said. "I know. There's a fallback point, old mine station, 2 clicks east. We move in an hour. I'm ready." He paused, watching her. "You're not who I thought you'd be." She stepped in, laid her hand over his chest again. Neither are you. And then, because the words weren't enough, she kissed him again, slow, deep, lasting. When they pulled away, the air between them was no longer fragile. It was solid. Jax picked up the rifle. She reached for her coat. And side by side, they prepared to run, not away, but towards something they'd stopped believing in, a future, together. The wind had died down, but the cold lingered, like a stubborn ghost. Thesson 3 held onto it, kept it buried in its metallic ribs and stone marrow, a planet that refused to forget its wounds. Inside the hollowed mining station, the recycled heat whispered through vents like an old lullaby, barely warming the metal bones of the shelter they had claimed. Jax checked the lock again. It was habit now, muscle memory wrapped in anxiety. He didn't trust the welds. He didn't trust much, except the woman standing behind him, Vela. She was wrapped in a heavy blanket, hair falling in waves over her bare shoulders, one hip caught in the faded edge of light from the old ceiling array. She didn't shiver anymore. The cold didn't touch her the way it used to. Maybe because what lived inside her now was hotter than fire. Choice, defiance, the need to claim something that had never truly belonged to her before. "How long?" she asked, voice low. Jax turned, leaning against the bulkhead. "Hard to say. Hours, maybe less. They'll come. They always do." She nodded. "Then let them. After." He stepped toward her, drawn like gravity. There was no performance in her posture, no pretense, just a woman standing in her own skin, unafraid for the first time in her life. Her gaze caught him mid-step, quiet, assured, burning like a signal flare in the dark. "I want this," she said simply. "Not because I'm afraid, not because I'm grateful. I want you, Jax. Do you understand that?" He reached her slowly, touched her face. "I do." Her fingers covered his. "Then let me show you." She let the blanket fall. Underneath, she was all curves and strength, every inch marked by survival. Faint scars caught the light, each one a story she hadn't told him yet. And still, she stood tall, bare, willing. Her hands undid the front of his shirt, slow and deliberate, like peeling back armor he no longer needed. He let her. She guided him down to the floor, onto the mat he'd laid out, the recycled fabric warmed by the nearby heater. When he tried to rise above her, instinct, she stopped him with a kiss, then pushed gently until he lay flat beneath her. "I want to feel what it's like to lead," she whispered against his jaw, "to be more than what they made me." He couldn't speak, could only nod. Vela straddled him with a slow, fluid grace that made his breath catch. Her thighs hugged his hips, and she slid down against him, teasing the line of connection, savoring the tension. Jax groaned softly, his hands finding her waist, fingers gripping skin still hot from the fire they'd both carried too long. When she took him inside her, it wasn't fast. It was reverent. A slow descent, breath breaking in her chest, eyes fluttering closed as she sank fully into him. Her back arched, head tilting back in quiet ecstasy. Jax's hands trembled on her thighs. He'd never seen anything like her. She began to move, not hurried, not shy. Each motion was deliberate, every roll of her hips measured, teasing out sensation with the careful grace of someone discovering her own rhythm for the first time. And she was, because it wasn't about pleasing anymore. It was about feeling. Jax watched her, chest rising with the strain of control. She was wild and composed all at once, moaning low when the angle changed, her hands bracing on his chest as she ground down onto him, chasing that perfect edge. Her lips parted not in submission, but in pleasure, raw, honest, hungry. She leaned forward, her breasts brushing his chest, and he caught her face in both hands, kissed her deep. When she moaned into his mouth, it wasn't for his sake. It was hers. Every sound she made was a revelation, a declaration of ownership over her own body, her own story, and he let her take all of it. "You're beautiful," he murmured, voice rough. "So are you," she whispered, gasping as she rocked harder, the friction building, her body tightening around him. "And you're mine tonight." She rode him with purpose now, lost in it, her voice breaking into soft cries with each thrust. Jax met her pace from below, hands holding her steady as she trembled above him. She leaned back slightly, changing the angle, and the pleasure made her cry out louder, one hand flying to the floor to steady herself. "Gods! Jax, don't stop!" she moaned, barely able to form the words. He couldn't have if he tried. Her climax came like a wave, full body, shuddering, her muscles seizing around him, her head thrown back as she let go completely. He followed, unable to resist the pull of her, burying himself deep as he came with a hoarse groan, her name on his lips like a vow. They stayed like that, tangled and slick with heat, breathless and stunned. Vela collapsed gently onto his chest, body spent but heart wide open. Her fingers traced the scars on his chest again, this time slower, more tender. "I've never felt anything like that," she murmured. "You deserve to," he said. She smiled against his skin, "And I'll deserve it again." But then the station shifted, a subtle tremor, almost missed. Jax's eyes snapped open. He sat up fast, pulling her with him. Lights flickered. The sensor console beeped to life, crackling data streams, movement, approaching fast. 3 life forms, not native. Vela reached for her clothes without panic. She was calm, focused, changed. Jax tossed her the plasma blade. She caught it easily, the way a woman catches her future. "No more hiding," she said. "No more," he echoed. They stood side by side at the door, ready, and behind them the fire still burned. The first tremor was subtle, more a vibration than a sound, but Jax felt it like a strike to the spine. He was crouched beside the console, one eye on the sensors, the other on the jagged access corridor leading out of the abandoned mine station. Vela stood behind him, her stance steady, one hand resting lightly on the plasma blade he'd given her. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The second tremor came 30 seconds later. Heavier, directional. They were landing nearby, a ship. Jax's fingers danced across the console, pulling up the decaying sensor array's data feed. Faint but clear. 3 inbound heat signatures. A small scout vessel, likely unarmed but fast, with enough room for a team of hunters. "I knew they'd come," Vela said, her voice even. "Not this soon," Jax muttered. "They must have caught your signal trail. Residual heat, maybe even a neural echo from the escape pod. We didn't burn the comms clean enough." "They don't leave anything behind," she said. "Not witnesses, not leaks. I'm not a person to them, Jax. I'm inventory." He looked back at her then, and she saw it in his eyes. The rage. Quiet, controlled, but deep. The kind of fury that comes from watching the same injustice repeat itself over and over again, until it carves itself into your bones. "Then they're going to learn what happens when their stock fights back," he said. Vela hesitated, then stepped closer. "There's something I need to tell you. You deserve the full truth before this starts." "I'm listening." She took a breath. Not for courage, she already had that, but to steady herself. To speak the words without them breaking her open. "The group chasing me, they're not just raiders. They call themselves the Crimson Chain. It sounds like a cartel, but it's deeper than that. They're a privatized trade syndicate hidden behind legal interstellar freight fronts. On the surface, they're miners, surveyors, bio-researchers. But off the records, they run one of the largest rare species slave markets in the outer spiral." She paused. Jax said nothing, only listened. "They didn't just take me. They took the entire ship I was born on. Zorella's Grace wasn't just a target, it was a harvest, a generational arc full of Zorellians. My people are empathic, reactive. We glow when we feel strong emotion. That made us beautiful, valuable, controlled." Her fingers curled into fists. "They spent years preparing me, isolating me, training me. They had buyers waiting, private collectors, political elites, royal houses on fringe worlds. But I escaped. Not because I was brave, because I was lucky. A guard left a panel unlocked. I ran before I thought about the price." Jax's voice came low, measured. "What is the price?" She looked up at him. "Me being free makes the rest of them look vulnerable. It's not just about reclaiming property. It's about sending a message. No one escapes the Crimson Chain." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he rose, crossed the room, and opened the weapons locker. "They're not getting you back. They'll kill you to try. Let them try." Outside, snow began to swirl again. Thin flurries carried on the wind. The slaver scout ship touched down just beyond the ridge, out of sight but not out of reach. Jax watched the live feed blink once, then settle. 3 heat signatures disembarked. He turned to Vela. "Remember what I showed you?" "Yes." "Blade to throat. Don't hesitate. Stay behind me unless I tell you otherwise. If I go down..." "You're not going down," she said sharply. He met her eyes. There was no fear in them anymore. "Then let's finish this," he said. The old mine tunnels were narrow and uneven. Perfect for Jax's kind of fight. He'd disabled most of the remaining lights, relying instead on portable flares he'd planted as lures and ambush points. The air smelled of metal and dust and time. They waited in silence near the junction point. Footsteps echoed from the south tunnel, slow, deliberate. "Don't speak," Jax whispered. A figure emerged, armor-clad, faceless behind a chrome mask, rifle raised. Behind him, another moved to flank. Standard Crimson Chain protocol. Close quarters sweep. Jax didn't wait. He rose from behind the crate, fired once, plasma blast to the neck seam. The first slaver dropped without a sound. The second turned, raising his weapon, but Vela was already moving. She lunged from the shadows, the blade in her hand flashing under the emergency lights. It caught the slaver beneath the arm joint, driving in deep. She twisted. He staggered, gasped, and fell. Jax turned. The third was retreating, raising a beacon flare. No! Too late. The signal launched into the sky. A pulse of light, bright red against the white sky. A summons. Vela stepped back, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Did we stop them? We stopped these three, Jax said. But now they know where we are. He grabbed her hand. We need to move. Now. They ran. Not because they were weak, but because they knew the next wave would be stronger, better armed, and this time, ready. They reached the upper shaft, sealed the exit hatch behind them. Outside, the storm had picked up again, wind slicing sideways through the rocks. But the cold was nothing now, nothing compared to the weight they'd just shed. They stopped beside a ridge. The scout ship smoldered below, its hull pierced from one of Jax's remote charges. Vela turned to him. I killed one of them, she said quietly. You survived one of them. I don't regret it. Good, Jax said. Because we're not done. She took his hand again, fingers tight. What now? We go east. There's a crash beacon relay. Old Federation tech. If it still works, I can send an encrypted call. There's a man I used to run with. If he's alive, he'll answer. And if not, then we take another stand, and another, until there's nowhere left for them to find us. Vela stared into the white, wind-blown sky. The flare was still visible, dim now but burning. They'll come with more. Let them, Jax said. They'll find less than they came for. They didn't look back as they left the mine station behind. There was no more room for fear. No space for what if. Only forward, only fire. And they were ready. They walked through the storm like they had nowhere else to be. The snow came down in silent waves, swirling around them in white veils. But neither Jax nor Vela turned back. The old mine station behind them was a place of ghosts now, shattered steel, smoldering metal, and the scent of smoke in the cold air. They had done more than survive there. They had chosen to live. The wind howled across the ridges, dragging with it pieces of broken sky. Jax's rifle was strapped across his back, the blade at his hip. Beside him, Vela moved with sure-footed grace, her movements sharp, purposeful. The plasma blade he'd given her was still at her side, worn, not as a weapon of fear, but of claim, of agency. Her face was set in a calm he hadn't seen before, not hardened, not numb, resolved. They reached the edge of the canyon ridge just as the beacon relay came into view, an ancient Federation emergency unit, mostly buried beneath snow and rusted rock. Jax knelt, brushed the frost from its panel, and began powering the interface with the backup cell he'd carried for a decade and never thought he'd use. It's not much, he said, but it's all we've got. Vela crouched beside him. Then it's enough. He worked in silence for several minutes, fingers steady despite the biting wind. The relay sputtered, then blinked. A dim pulse, faint signal, but it worked. He uploaded the code, encrypted, personal. If anyone could decrypt it, it would be Thorn, a name Jax hadn't spoken aloud in years. The last of his old crew. A pilot, smuggler, once a war criminal, now a ghost in the deep systems. If Thorn got the signal, he'd come, if he was alive. Jax stood, exhaled. Now we wait. Vela slipped her gloved fingers into his. He didn't pull away. Hours passed. They sheltered beneath a natural stone overhang, firelight flickering between them, the wind still singing its low dirge outside. Vela lay against Jax's chest, listening to his heartbeat, the rhythm of it stronger than any promise. Her eyes were half closed, but her mind was awake. She whispered, "What will you do when it's over?" He looked down at her, brow furrowed slightly. This? All of it, she said. The running, the killing, the cold. He was quiet for a while. Then, I'll keep building something warm. And you? She smiled against his chest. I'll stop asking if I deserve to stay. Jax kissed her forehead. You've already stayed, he said. I'm just trying to catch up. The sound of thrusters came like thunder rolling across the ice. Jax stood instantly, pulling Vela to her feet. Above the ridge, cutting through the clouded sky, a small freighter broke the storm line. Its hull was old, scarred, painted black. But the markings, barely visible through years of dust, were unmistakable. A white half circle, a wolf's eye, Thorn. Jax raised the signal flare and fired. The freighter circled once, then descended into the basin. When the hatch opened, the ramp hissed out, and a tall figure stepped into view, wrapped in a long coat of patchwork armor and fur. His face was older, sharper, but the grin hadn't aged a day. Well, Thorn said. I thought you were dead. Close enough, Jax replied. And the girl? Jax turned to Vela. She met Thorn's gaze head-on. No flinching, no fear. She's the reason I'm not. Thorn's eyes narrowed, reading more than words, but he nodded. Then I'd say it's time to go. They boarded together. The ramp closed behind them with a groan of metal and airlock pressure. Vela stood at the view panel as they lifted off, watching the surface of Thesson 3 fall away beneath them, ice, fire, and all the shadows she was leaving behind. Jax joined her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Not until the stars opened before them, like the pages of a forgotten story. I used to think freedom was just being alone, she said softly. Not owing anyone anything, not being seen. And now? He asked. She turned, pressed her forehead against his. Now I think freedom is knowing someone would fight beside you, not for you, but with you. He kissed her, slow, deep, like the universe had just begun again. It had been 32 days since they stepped off the ship and into the soil of their new world. Jax didn't know what he expected from freedom. He certainly hadn't imagined trees that swayed with orange leaves or skies that bled lilac and gold at dusk. He hadn't expected warmth, not just from the sun, but from the earth itself, which seemed to hum beneath his boots like it had been waiting for them all along. The settlement was small, no more than 20 dwellings nestled between the cliffs and a freshwater river that sparkled with pale blue algae at night. Locals called the planet Lyrae, though Vela insisted it should have a new name, something of their own. We weren't born here, she said one morning as she trimmed vine fruit by the fence, her long black hair tied back with leather. But maybe this place will be the first place we're allowed to live. Allowed, not assigned, not sold, not hunted. They had chosen to be here. Jack spent most of his mornings repairing old field units or helping reinforce the colony's perimeter with solar netting. He wasn't the man who once haunted outposts on dead moons. He still carried a weapon, always would, but these days, it rested on the wall of their home instead of across his shoulder. Vela worked the gardens, learned to filter the air ducts, taught the colonists about her people's way of listening to weather shifts by sensing ionic change in the atmosphere. Sometimes, they watched her in quiet awe when she stood barefoot in the grass at night, glowing faintly blue in the moonlight like something sacred. But it was Jax who knew the real her, the version who woke up tangled in his arms with sleep-mussed hair and half-whispered dreams in a language only she remembered. The version who still flinched sometimes at sudden metal clanks, but no longer from fear, just memory. And each night, when the sky turned amber and the air cooled, they would sit outside their small home, 2 mugs of heated brew between them, and say nothing at all, because silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peace. That evening, the sky was especially clear. No dust, no clouds, the stars stretched above them like silver veins. Jax had finished early and was sharpening one of the field tools outside when he heard her footsteps behind him. Barefoot, light. He turned. Vela stood in the doorway, wrapped in a thin, sleeveless robe that drifted around her body like mist. Her hair was down, curling at the ends, her skin catching the light of the twin moons. He smiled. Garden all set? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she crossed the distance between them slowly, with the kind of grace that was not for show, but for invitation. When she stopped in front of him, her fingers reached for his, guiding the blade gently from his hand. I've been thinking, she said softly. Dangerous, he teased. Her eyes twinkled. Number necessary. He looked down at her, sensing something deeper in her voice. I told you once, she continued, that I would reward you if you let me in. Jax's jaw tensed slightly. He remembered that moment, that freezing night, her voice trembling through the intercom. That's not why I let you in, he said, voice low. I know, she said. That's why you deserve it now. Not because you asked, but because you didn't. She pulled him by the hand, guiding him back toward their cabin. The door closed behind them with a soft hiss. Inside the room was dim, lit only by a cluster of solar lamps casting a golden hue. The bed was simple, just a low platform lined with soft woven sheets. But it was theirs, their space, their choosing. Vela turned to him, slowly undoing the knot at her waist. The robe slipped from her shoulders, falling in a whisper to the floor. She stood before him, bare, unashamed, radiant. Not an offering, not a gift, a woman choosing what she wanted. You gave me freedom, she said. Now I give you mine. Jax moved toward her, hands tentative at first, always gentle, always asking, even without words. She leaned into his touch, lips brushing his jaw, then his throat, then his chest. He lifted her, laid her back onto the bed with reverence, not urgency. They had all the time in the world now. Her legs wrapped around him, not to hold, but to join. Their bodies moved together in perfect rhythm, not driven by need but by knowing. She whispered his name like a poem lost to time. He spoke hers like a prayer too sacred to be loud. He kissed every inch of her, her shoulders, her ribs, the inside of her wrist where the brand had once lived. He no longer saw the mark, only the woman. And when she came undone beneath him, she did so with tears in her eyes, not from pain, but from release. Release from fear, from silence, from all the nights she thought she'd die alone, unseen, unchosen. Jax held her long after, their bodies slick with heat, limbs tangled in the afterglow. The world was quiet around them, not a threat in sight, only breath, only peace, only them. Later, as they lay in the open doorway watching the stars together, Vela rested her head on his shoulder. I never thought I'd feel full, she whispered. I always thought I'd have to trade pieces of myself to survive. You did, he said, but now you get to grow them back. She smiled, kissed him once more, slow, lasting, free.